Calling Scientology a cult is a bit like calling water wet. I don't think you gain any points, any notoriety, simply by stating the obvious. There are many things about it which are worth mentioning, of course. There are certain things which are worth considering as far as cult characteristics, how they operate. The peculiarity of their beliefs aren't really strong ground for calling it a cult, other than saying it's not Christian, it's not Muslim, it's not the same as, you know, mainstream religions. It shares some similarities with certain other organisations, those around the mid-20th century and even late 20th century, and yeah, that makes it similar to a great many things. But also, it doesn't really say a lot. You know, so what if they believe in sea powers? They believe they have psychic powers if you get to a certain level. So what if the ultimate truth of the Thetans is that they're alien spirits left on Earth trillions of years ago? A peculiar concept to have trillions of years in a universe that's only billions of years old, when the evil Lord Xenu, a galactic ruler of a galactic confederacy, annihilated huge numbers of beings on the Earth using atomic bombs on the edges of volcanoes. Apparently all the Earth and everything else existed. Whether or not this is a different universe or whatever the case may be is another matter, I suppose. Reincarnation? They believe in reincarnation, of course, because they believe they're alien spirits within human forms, and the spirits are clustered together, so you incarnate, and to become a fully operating Thetan, a full OT, you basically have to separate these other beings from you, and that separates you from your neuroses, because all the neuroses are meant to be these alien beings attached to you, and that's what causes your instability, basically. At least that's the claim. Or at least that's some of the claims, which aren't heavily spoken about, but they are heavily exposed to some of the deep ideas within Scientology. The basic ideas, though, are simply that you have a spirit. It's called a Thetan. You're a being which uses a body and a mind, and you are fundamentally that spirit which incarnates in many uncounted lives throughout an infinite amount of time. And through certain therapies you can become more aware of that and more in control of your life and develop as a human being. That's the fundamental kind of line that Scientology would project. But yeah, it's meant to be self-help. It's actually about generating money. It charges, in some cases, extortionate amount for the courses. Many people who can't afford it end up paying off their debts by doing manual labour and being paid a token amount of money. So if you're meant to be paid X amount, and that's like, you know, it's like a minimum wage amount of money, then it's halved, because half of that money has to go to paying off the course, and the other half goes to you because it's only fair. And it seems to be a good deal, but you're still paying off thousands of pounds or dollars, depending on where you are in the world, trying to achieve your goals. They use certain mind-altering activities, styles of meditation and focus. And yeah, you could easily call them, because of their peculiarities, a cult. I would focus more on the exploitation, though. They were founded by a kind of con man, a sci-fi writer that I don't really rate personally, a compulsive liar, and I would say a person possibly with a narcissistic personality, who effectively made himself the ultimate leader of a peculiar small sect, which back in the 60s and 70s was more or less a sex cult, amongst other things. It was a highly liberated sex cult with a scientific bent. But in any case, over the years it has developed and changed. The leader, who's been in since L. Ron Hubbard died, David Miscavige, he has changed the organisation to be something a lot different from what it used to be. It used to be a angry scam. At least it had, you know, free love and a number of other interesting concepts. David Miscavige has made it far more conservative, far more limiting, and has encouraged people to spend far more in the organisation, to keep the organisation in funds and extend the influence of the organisation, despite hard times of many members leaving, and organisations or movements, I suppose, like Anonymous, damaging their public reputation. Their exposure to the light of day has done them no good whatsoever. That interests me a lot more then the ideas, like the wacky ideas of space, leaders and ancient spirits, that stuff you can take it or leave it. That's very similar to many other organisations. That's why it's easy enough to make some comparisons between, say, Scientology and Raelianism, or certain other almost New Age kind of groups. In fact, there are some New Age groups with very similar ideas indeed. A lot of those ideas are shared in different organisations. Some people are probably Scientologists or ex-Scientologists, have fallen into other movements, or at least people within the New Age spiritual movement have borrowed heavily from existing work, including the work of Scientology. So it's understandable that wacky ideas would exist. But the fundamental discussion about what is a cult comes down to how they operate, how they have a supreme leader, the supreme leadership, the authority in place, the recruiting, manipulation, brainwashing, continued control, and they separate you from your family and very often from your own money, and it's all excusable in the name of the ultimate belief. The people at the top are almost certainly not believers in it, but the people below almost certainly are, and they accept an awful lot of baggage because, well, they believe in it. And many people who leave, well, that's okay because they don't believe in it. You don't need to convince everyone, just enough people to keep them in, keep people coming in, keep on recruiting people. And one of the ways they do that is with their free stress tests. And there are a couple of methods of doing that. There's a questionnaire where you tick boxes. And there's also the e-meter test. And the results are tallied up and they say, well, you've got this and that and we can help you with this and that. And they think it's scientific because they believe. And it's only really those people who are, and probably especially the main person, who actually realises how made up this actually is. And through their own psychological problems, they may well end up, well, believing in it to some degree. I mean, it's possible that David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, basically, he believes in an awful lot of it. It could be that he's kind of weaved it into his own little ego trip. And, I'm going to use the word narcissist again, but it seems to be that he could easily be a narcissist who is using the belief to fulfill his dreams, basically of godhood. That being said, as a child he had stress-related asthma, and Scientology helped remove that. So for him that's a miracle, that he managed to lose his asthma, he managed to get rid of it, keep it under control. And for him, I suppose that makes Scientology ultimately true. So if he isn't actually a person with an ego of that size, at least not in that way, he's a person who's a true believer who may as well have an ego problem. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. I suppose it all depends what you look at. And obviously there have been several deaths and injuries and threats and legal cases. There's an awful lot of this kind of stuff which is obviously conducive to the point that it's operating as a dangerous organisation. Whether you think David Miscavige believes in it or not, whether you think he's a narcissist or not, whether you think the organisation operating like a cult for the average person who practices it or not, what you can say is it operates in a very, very dangerous way in certain cases, and it's heavily based around the authority which directly connects to David Miscavige and his inner circle. And very much like Joseph Smith, he ends up falling out with a lot of people who are in his inner circle and tries to expel those people who might otherwise be dangerous to him or otherwise bring them down. And for people he doesn't want to lose, doesn't want to see exposed, removed from the organisation, they're basically kept almost like serfs. And one thing that needs to be emphasised more by people is, at the base level, it doesn't seem to be too bad. This is true of every cult organisation, barring but a few. The Manson family, if you're interacting with the Manson family, you're pretty soon on, say if you were around in the, back in the 60s, late 60s, and, there's a bunch of these pretty girls, and there's this crazy guy with a beard. Is that Tex or is that Charles Manson? Oh, that's Tex, he's talking crazy, but Manson comes in, he's talking real crazy. Well, that's a bit different. But most organisations like Scientology, they seem to be trying to help people. They seem to be professional. They seem to be legit. If you don't know better, they seem to be telling the truth, being honest, being helpful, being assisting, trying to help you. And all you have to do, okay, we've done the free test. We recommend a cheap course, £15, a cheap book, £15, And, you know, how do you feel about that? If you like it, then the next one's going to be 30, and before you know it, you're spending 100, and then you're spending a bit more. And there's a special course, a weekend course, we get away, there's a thing over to here, there's a thing over there. We don't do that here, but we do it at the next centre, etc. And eventually it filters out those people who might be trouble, usually. Those people who might well question the belief too much and cause people within the belief to think, well, maybe they're right, maybe there are lies being told within this belief. They're the people who are filtered out by this kind of process. And as I say, this is not exclusive to Scientology. It's within many organisations, even within mainstream religion, where if you go along to this course or that course and you go, I don't think it's for me, you don't keep on going, or at least you probably don't. And with cults, you know, with cult organisations, it's very often no different in some ways. It's true of Eastern gurus, it's true of a great many practices. Because the people who aren't so devout, aren't so sure, aren't so keen, aren't so friendly, won't spend the money, they won't invest in it, they won't waste their time in it, or spend their time in it, and they'll change their mind. Whereas those people who are very much into it and think this is working, they push it and they become very devout about it, you're not going to be able to change their mind anyway, probably. But they're also the last people who would question. They're the people who are ideal at doublethink. And when it comes down to being part of an organisation, they're the type of people who will do groupthink. So doublethink, you can think this is true and that is true. They're incompatible. But I'm going to accept it anyway because the organisation said this. They say something wrong about evolution. Well, I'm just going to ignore that. You know, a heavily edited book which supposedly was written by L. Ron Hubbard with a fact which isn't quite a fact, or something that's been changed, you might well ignore that. And with groupthink, everyone else is going along with this. I must be mistaken. I guess I still have a lot to learn. That's very common to a great many beliefs. I mean, that's common to, say, meditation groups with spiritualists. You know, well, I heard something else. And if you try and you know, open up that can of worms, you can start arguments amongst even civil, moderate people. But with Scientology, you're probably not going to do that. And if you're a kind of person who's going to be asking the wrong questions too often, you're probably the kind of person they're going to push harder to see if you're going to simply storm off and leave, or if you're going to belong to the organisation and accept every word they say.